codes and fund codes. So let's move on. There are two codes that are related to appeal and fund codes but are not required. They can be used if they're useful. They are campaigns and departments. Both group codes together. Campaigns group appeal codes and departments group fund codes. For example, let's say that throughout the year you do special letter campaigns where you send solicitations to groups of your donors. Maybe you do one for each season, spring, summer, fall, and winter. First, you'll create an appeal code for each one. Then, as gifts come in, you'll enter those gift records and link those gifts to the appropriate appeal code. When it comes time to report on those fundraising letter solicitations, you can get a list of all the gifts that came in as a result of the spring letter, another report for the summer letter, etc. One way to group them together is by creating a campaign code and linking each appeal to that campaign. In this example, we might create a campaign called Letter Solicitations 2015. Now we can get a report for that campaign, which will then include all of the gifts for those 4 appeal codes. Remember, though, that a campaign is not required. If you don't need to group them together, you don't need to use a campaign. Let's look at how to create a campaign and link the appeal codes. First, we're going to go to the Gifts tab. And the reason we're going to the Gifts tab is because the campaign is a gift characteristic. In other words, it's a code that relates to gifts. And so we go to the Gifts tab. We're going to come down here to Campaigns. Here we see a list of all the campaigns that somebody has already created here in the training company. We're going to go ahead and click on Add New. And we see the description and code fields, just like we did with appeals and fund codes. First thing we're going to do is enter the description. The description is for us, so I'm just going to type letter 2015. And we need to give it a code. So I'll just make this really simple, LTR_15. Those are really the only 2 fields that we have to have. Those are the required fields. And so we can click Save at this point, and our campaign code is ready to be used. But let's look at some of the other fields here. First, we see the active checkbox. By unchecking that box, that simply makes the campaign inactive. And you should use that box, or you should make those inactive when you're no longer using campaigns. It keeps your lists short and a little more manageable. The SAT dedupe field refers to Share-a-thon. SAT stands for Share-a-thon. And so if you're not using the Share-a-thon module, you won't need this field. And basically, what it does is it tells Denari that during a Share-a-thon to look back at this campaign and look for duplicate donations. It's trying to make sure that people aren't making 2 donations when they only intended to make 1. And that will get explained more in the Share-a-thon training. We have the campaign start and end date. These are really informational in nature. This is really good when you come back here a few years from now and you look at this and need to know when this campaign took place. That gives you that information. We have the default fund code. The fund code really only relates to this in terms of if all of your gifts that come into this campaign are going to the same fund, then you can select that fund code here. And it really doesn't do anything in Denari. It's just informational in nature. It just tells you that all of your gifts that came in went to that fund code. Over here we have the default thank you ID. This is quasi-required. It's not technically required if you're not using Online Community. Online Community is Denari's portal for allowing donors to make gifts online. If you're not using that, then you don't have to use this field. However, if you are using that, if you're taking gifts by credit card or EFT, then you do need to use this field. In Denari, you have to assign a letter to that gift, and that letter is what shows up on the thank you receipt if you're using Denari's receipts. And so you'll have already created that letter, and you'll just click the drop down in gift entry and select the letter. When someone makes a donation online, Denari creates that gift record for you, and it has to get that letter from somewhere. And so this is that location. So if you're using Online Community, you do have to have a campaign, and that campaign does need to be linked to a letter so that it has something to put into that field in the gift record. Down here we have the project order, the subject, and the fiscal year. These are all informational fields that you can use if you want to. Again, they're just informational. They don't show up on a report anywhere, and they're not going to be a field that you can filter on. The one-time goal and the monthly goal can be informational, but these are also used for share-a-thon. So again, if you're using that share-a-thon module, this is where you would set the goal that will show up in some of the statistical analysis that Denari does for you during the share-a-thon. And again, that's all covered in the share-a-thon. The online community fields here really aren't used related to the campaign, and so you can just pretty much ignore these fields at this point. Now, a department code is very similar to a campaign, except that, and you probably already guessed it, that it groups fund codes together. So just like the campaign, it's optional. You don't have to group your fund codes if you don't need that or don't want to use that. So let's look at how we create a department. Again, we're going to go to the Gifts tab. We'll come here to Departments. Here we see a list of all the departments that someone's already created. I'm going to go ahead and click on Add New. And this form is pretty simple. We're just going to put in a description and a code. And this priority field here is no longer used, and so you won't need that. And all we need to do now is hit save, and we've created our department record. So how do we link appeal codes to campaigns and fund codes to departments? Again, we're going to go back to the Gifts tab, and we're going to come to our appeal codes. And I'm just going to go ahead and pick one here that's already here just to show you. Here we have that campaign ID field. We talked about this briefly when we talked in the other session, the first session. But here you're basically just going to click the little question mark. You'll see a search screen, and so you can use the search screen fields there to find the campaign that you've already created and just select it. And now this appeal code is linked to this campaign when we hit save. Now we can go and run a report for this campaign, the TC_BANQ campaign, and it will include all the gifts that have been linked to the 04 English Special Appeal. And of course, we can go ahead and link other appeal codes to this group as well. And now when we run this campaign, we're going to get all the gifts for all of those appeal codes that are linked to that same campaign. Let's go to the Gifts tab and look at fund codes. Again, I'm just going to pick one that's already here. And here we see the department field. So again, we can do the same thing. We click the little question mark. We're going to do the search, find the department that we've already set up. In this case, somebody has selected 07. That's the code for that department. And now any gift linked to this fund, the building fund, is going to show up in a department report for this particular department, for the 07 department. A good example of how this gets used, let's say you're a missionary organization. You may have 100 missionaries, and you have a fund code that represents each one of those missionaries. When it comes time to get a report of all of the donations for all of the missionaries, you can do that by entering in all of those fund codes. So you could say fund code 1 plus fund code 2 plus fund code 3 plus 4 plus 5 all the way to 100 to include all of those funds in one report. But an easier way to do that is to set it up ahead of time, linking all 100 of those fund codes to a department that you might call missionary. Then you can simply create a report for that department called missionary, which would include all the gifts for all 100 of those fund codes. And so that's probably the most practical way that it gets used, and I'm sure you can think of ways to use it in your data as well. So let's stop there. We've covered mostly the gift codes. We're going to move on to name codes in our next session.